Okay. Hello, good morning. Today, I'd like to share a few of my tiles from my doctoral thesis, which I submitted a few weeks ago, titled Women Living with Chronic Autoimmune Irreversible Illnesses, an Autoethnographic Study and Narratives in Malta. In my thesis, I metaphorically referred to the Maltese style as being specific and synonymous to the culture and context of Malta, embracing tradition, manifesting endurance, resilience, and survival. The theme of this conference, A Right to Roam, is synonymous to my experience in the writing of my thesis. I found myself roaming different paths, avenues, memories, and experiences through and across time, historical and present, on many different levels, both personal and political, intertwined in my cultural envelope in synchrony to health and illness. So before starting with the three different captions that I'm going to speak about, I would like to set the scene to give context. Malta is an independent European country, for people that might not know, which covers an area of approximately 316 kilometers squared. So it's quite small, with a population of approximately 500,000. Despite its smallness, Malta has played a prominent part in history of the world due to the specific geographical position, centrally located in the Mediterranean between Europe and North Africa. The Maltese culture, including the growth of our language, Roman Catholic religion, education, and political views, have evolved over time under each successive ruler, ultimately gaining independence from British Empire in 1964. Following independence, Malta became the much more globalized and multicultural, with an ongoing influx of EU and non-EU citizens migrating to Malta. Malta today oscillates between modernism and tradition. This is partly due to the relatively strong Catholic morality, conservative beliefs, and kinship ties that make it an ambivalent location. However, other religions are freely practiced. Notwithstanding that fact, Malta's society is predominantly Catholic. It is important to note that the recent changes in legislation, including divorce, same-sex marriage, and civil partnership, indicate a more liberal, more secular society and distances from the previously conservative one. So whilst embarking on this project, I questioned the intersection of women, illness, and culture more profoundly. My experience as a child in the 70s was a different story from most of my friends at school. All my friends' mothers were stay-at-home mothers, whilst my mother was born in the Second World War, always worked as a teacher, and so did her 6 sisters. Today, I reflect on how this has shaped and molded my thinking, behavior, and understanding of health and illness. I have grown up in an environment where family, work, education, health, and religion played an integral part of our identity and formation of values and beliefs. I learned and witnessed meaning of self-control, resistance, commitment, strength, and resilience firsthand. My mother suffered and still lives with rheumatoid arthritis, and she has had this since she was 20 years old. Therefore, I became more curious to understand how the past affects our present and how it can in turn affect our future. As I immersed deeper into the different layers of the project, I also exposed different layers of self. I continue to assert in the non-linearity of the process, but embrace it as being dynamic and continuously evolving and transforming one. Aspects from the past are transgenerational and expressed consciously and unconsciously in the way we act, speak, and think, both as individuals and collectively. Hence, I share 3 different tiles, as I said before, which are
seems to have frozen.
Yeah. I keep going. Three different tiles, which are the linguistic affiliation, traditional, modern, woman in Malta, and contextualizing illness. So the first style is the linguistic affiliation, which that I'm going to share a radio interview where I was asked to present my research in Maltese. I'm panicking. I cannot seem to find the correct translation of some words. And my interviewer said, which words are you talking about? So I was waiting a COVID test, and I was, it's okay. And I was doing this from home. So even there, the contact was very, very minimal. Two most important words written in English in my text, which are self and care. I cannot find the right translation of these words in Maltese that reflect the same meaning of these words. Can I say them in English? Wall had affirmed that the aim of writing, in this case audio recording, was to speak a language that the audience could understand, so that what was being said could be heard. Unlike all other presentations which I had presented in English on different occasions, the radio interview was to be presented in Maltese. It was the first time ever I was going to present my autoethnographic project to an unknown, unseen audience using Maltese language and in Malta. Although Maltese is the native language spoken by most of the population in Malta, it is not the only language used by the people on the island. I, like many Maltese, claim to be bilingual and or even plurilingual, equally fluent, mainly using Maltese and English simultaneously as the first language, switching effortlessly between languages according to the context and the audience. The ambivalence in language use is transgenerational, intrinsically ingrained, inherited through our history of invasion and colonization over the years. So in preparation for this interview, I aspired to retain the same meaning when translating words from English to Maltese and vice versa. Both the radio interview and eventually translating illness stories of my four women collaborators brought to the forefront the complexity and intrinsicies and responsibility in using symbols, language, and modes of communication when switching languages. A broader meaning beyond the linguistic language was elicited, accentuating power and revealing the social linguistic and psycholinguistic connotations. It is not just a matter of switching between one language to another, but how the same message is communicated and interpreted in different languages. At times, it felt as if I had forgotten to speak and to write both in English and in Maltese. Incidentally, as stated earlier, I struggled in finding the appropriate translation for two very commonly used words in the study, which are self and care. The translation of the word Maltese would be referred to as kura. However, kura only comprises the medical and physical aspects of care. The other word I struggled with is self. The closest translation of self to Maltese was Ilyin, as referred to by Duncan Saila, who is a renowned Maltese poet and the author of the Maltese national anthem, in his poem Ilyin u Lilin Minnu, which is translated beyond self by Kakia, or I and beyond it by Frigieri. Nevertheless, I did not feel that the identified translation manifested the intended meaning. Therefore, in this instance, decided to retain the English version. During the time of this interview, this is the reflection. I was feeling physically and emotionally exhausted as well as burnt out. On one hand, as an educator and academic member on the placement committee of the Department of Nursing at University of Malta, we were facing numerous issues and problems with student placements in hospital due to COVID. On the other hand, I was living through the tension and anxiety of COVID firsthand, whilst I was working in public health COVID response case management team. It was as if I was swimming in the ocean with no land in sight. Ironically, I unconsciously or consciously found difficult in translating two important words, separate words, which are self and care. Upon reflection, I realized that the language and the meaning of such words were much broader and deeper than the translation of the text. It was the time where self-care was forgotten, but very much needed. So the second tile I'm going to speak about is the contextualizing woman across the years in Malta. I felt it was essential to provide a sample of periodic background information about Malta collected from diverse sources to elicit how specific social, political, educational, religious, and cultural backgrounds continues to influence choices, behavior, personal agency, and conceptualization of illness. In a feature-independent newspaper called Female Medical Staff in Hospitaller Malta, Camilleri stated that in the time of the Order of St. John in Malta, while the management and administration of the hospital, known as Sacra Infermeria, was almost entirely male-dominated. Women also played important roles in the medical scene, which included the administration and running of the female hospital and caring for female patients. Mifsud Bonnici in 2015 and her research looked on women in the 18th century with legal and social aspects. Women's legal and social status, even though limited when compared to men, were neither invisible nor inaudible nor unimportant, as confirmed by women's participation in the economy as well as in other tasks, in proof that ordinary lives were not limited to just bringing up families. Fast forward, and recently, Vizanic examined in 2018 some of the shifts in personal agency and life domain of young women, fluctuating between the ambivalence of traditional and modern, by comparing a group of young women to another group with 50 years age difference who had continued their studies to tertiary non-compulsory education. It resulted that various structural and cultural factors that had direct impact on the woman's personal agency in Malta, namely the church, legislation, and education. The main outcomes of the study highlighted that the context cannot be divorced from the process. Despite the increasing advancement in society, strong family ties, moral regulations are still very present and continue to influence young women's negotiation of life choices, roles, and responsibilities. The last style will be contextualizing illness and uncertainty. In view of the above, I questioned how illness and self-care fits women's ordinary lives of today. How do women living with chronicity construe health and illness in a world where patriarchy still continues to reign and women still continue to be silenced? Is the illness behavior representation still being dovetailed by social, political, religious, and cultural attributes? The process and degree of individuation and agency whilst living with it, the illness condition, is yet another issue that could influence juggling the multiplicity of selves in between the liminalities of tradition and modernity. In my study, I invited another 4 women collaborators who were all very well informed about the medical aspect of their chronic condition. It was not a question of making sense or how to cope with the condition per se. They had been doing that for years. What they seemed to be contending with was the uncertainty of the future as a woman living in Malta, how they were going to live, fulfill their roles and expectations in the best means possible. They were in a position where they had already made necessary adjustments to their life, including work, acknowledging and adjusting to pain and chronicity, making decisions and planning their life accordingly. From their story, alongside my story, it is evident that such adjustments were many a time influenced by the transgeneration attributes. The search for coherent, authentic self seemed to be an ongoing endeavor alongside the illness. Being diagnosed myself in the 1980s with ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, also called chronic fatigue syndrome, which was then a contested illness, still quite contested till today, was considered a relief after being misdiagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which was my first initial diagnosis. However, since symptoms eventually became more moderate after the years, I started to doubt the truth of my second diagnosis once again, the possibility of being misdiagnosed, and then questioned my own authenticity as if it were my own fault. Similarly, the women collaborators claimed that the search for the authentic self was continuously evolving trajectory in tandem with the illness and unpredictability. Making sense of the coherent embodied self as a woman was evidenced in a multitude of ways, reflecting socio-cultural factors and the ultimate aim to prove their worth alongside the invisibility of their chronic condition, namely on a personal level, education, work, and cultural living up to the societal expectations as women. Caring for the family members by protecting them from keeping secrets about their illness and medication, bearing children or not, and eventually caring for their own family. Whilst listening to these stories related by the women collaborators who are young adults in the present, writing on the page, I was swaying backwards and forwards between the youth of my past and the adulthood of my present. The past and the present became intertwined, making sense of experiences, traumas, reevaluating body, health, and life. I was fluctuating between self-care and agency, or submissiveness and silencing, between tradition and modernity. All this brought to the forefront how we continue to repeat certain family patterns, embracing values and beliefs, reconfirming our script, even in illness. It became more explicit how thinking, actions, and behavior are oftentimes dictated by overtones of our past, how transgeneration attributes and our contextual environments influence and conditions decisions. The difference now from then is that I am able to look back in retrospect from the presence of the now. However, the individuation of how we live, the outcome, and what we do with the meaning is a very personal journey, yet at the same time, a collective one. Thank you.
Next one's online, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's, so it's not.
Yeah, there's no. Keeping up test master. No.
We seem to have lost mouse movement. Anybody, any experts in terms of mice? Okay. Do we have to
turn it off and turn it back on again? I think it's going to have to be. There's...
Okay. Okay. For those online, we may need just to, you may need to just log back into Zoom after we restart. Do you want to?
Might have to be a heartbeat.
Start.
So can you see the slides?
Yes.
Great. So we can start. Where's Berit? Can you see Berit?
Yes. Berit, are you ready?
The mic, Berit, we cannot hear.
So now I'm here.
Yeah.
And we are about to start. We just go on now.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you everyone. Welcome and good morning This collaborative project started 1 year ago after the two Norwegians of the workshop held our conference about dignity. And this presentation is called the Macramé of Thoughts about touching, non-touching, to be touched, and intimacy. After this workshop 1 year ago, we invited our colleagues to join in, and this is a presentation of how our work is being developed. And the next slide, please.
6 members of SREA, 2 from Norway, 3 from Italy, 1 from UK, come together to share specific stories about individuals whose life events have resulted in a loss of dignity, to see what, as adults, we can learn from each other and how this learning might be transformative for our daily lives.
So, by sharing our stories, we have a collaborative autoethnography, and we are striving to capture the essence of dignity and the importance of touching and how this manifests in everyday life. And yes, we can go into the next slide, just say something about the theoretical framework.
Our theoretical and methodological framework is interdisciplinary because we come from different disciplines, as well as coming from different countries and different institutions. The common language that we have in our methodological and theoretical framework is autoethnography. So we grounded our work into autoethnography, and particularly evocative autoethnography and the power of objects in autoethnography. Also, we relate to Richardson and St. Pierre in writing as a method of inquiry, where we highlight writing as the process rather than the product. And also slightly influenced by post-human and new materialism thinking and philosophy, particularly new materialism and in the vitality of matter and objects. And we don't have more time to go into the theoretical background, so next slide, please.
Today, we want to share some fragments of our story that we collect and share together. Hazel speak about maintaining rules between a mother and daughter. Donata tell us about a loss between a brother and a sister. I, Silvia, spoke about a relationship and resonance between a granddaughter, grandmother, and a client. Berit shared with us a relation between mother, daughter, a therapist, as a relationship of proxy. Inger shared with us a story about reciprocity, mother-in-law and granddaughters. And the end, but not the least, Gaia shared with us passing memory down generation between grandmother, mother, and daughter.
Yes, Hazel, right. Being able to convert a gloomy bathroom into a bright new shower room, remove the indignity of mother needing help to bath, and enable us to live independently in parallel once again. Next.
I just want to highlight that Hazel, the previous slide, could not be present today, so Inger read on her behalf. My story, which will be fully developed in next session, so I'm not going to speak much now about it, but at the same time, my story is part of this macrame and collective working and writing together. My story, it's about undignity and untouching, because it's a story of touch being forbidden and caring being forbidden through COVID. And it's the story of my beloved brother who died during COVID at age 59. And I was not able to touch and to care for him because he was in an intensive care. So I wrote a little poem and the story will be further developed in next section. So the little poem has also a couple of Italian words. No touching. It's dangerous. No touching. It could kill you. No touching. Stay distant. No touching. It's contagious. No touching. You're not allowed here. No touching. Non si può entrare qui. No touching. Deve stare fuori. No touching. Thank you.
My story is about touching because during the pandemic, I'm in Milan. I visited Julia, an older woman, 96 years old, who live in a wheelchair, close in a house. And my relationship with her is between a Feldenkrais method teacher, who am I, and her, my client. Touching her hands, I discover a picture in your room where I can see Julia during his honeymoon in Calais in 1966. So this relationship, silent relationship between my body, my hand, and his leg is full of memory.
And me, Berit, is going to say something about my part of this work. It's about my mother. And I saw her pain and her loneliness during the pandemic, and I tried to meet her with dignity. First I wrote, I met her with dignity, but how can I be sure of that? How can I be sure that another sees my hair as dignified? And I asked myself in this work, when someone turns to stone, as happened with my mother, more or less, a kind of metaphor, of course, and too full of feelings to relate to others or themselves, not to be related and not to be able to be related. What would happen then when it's either dignity or respect? I think that my responsibility in this work is to room on her behalf, making her story with our common macramé of touch and thoughts. So that was my short story, and I will try to say something more in the paper that we are going to write together. So next one, please.
Yes, Inger-Helene. Grandmother gave her grandchildren her love, care, food, and attention, telling them stories, laughing with them, cuddling and touching them lovely throughout their childhood. But slowly she became old and sick. She had cancer for 11 years and needed care at the age of 80. Grandmother's daily life is filled with home nursing, medicine, and focus on sickness and needs, making her a thing, not a human being. But her grandchildren gives her a glimpse of hope and a tremendous amount of love. Thank you. Next.
So that's me. The story I'm going to tell is about my grandmother and my mother. You see them in the picture upright. So my mother is the little daughter on the right, the grandfather, and beside the grandmother. And my mother collected on the phone the story of her mother during COVID, when Dorothea, the grandmother, was isolated in a room in an elderly home. And then my mom published a book, self-published a book in a few copies, with the exact words that grandma told on the phone, and she added pictures. And the grandmother was really, really surprised to see her story in a book. So this woman was always a wife in her life, like 60 years marriage, and she lived in 5 different regions, but she was never independent in her life, and she couldn't believe her stories was interesting for somebody else. Actually, the relationship of my mother and her mother has never been very easy. And this is the book, Storia di Dorothea. And this is just the first picture of my grandmother, who was very happy of the book. Next.
So beautiful, and thank to all of my colleagues. It's all about relation, and that relationships really matters. And we are very engaged in a kind of passionate sociology that involves a central and full-bodied approach to knowing and to practices of knowledge, such as reading, writing, teaching. As Donata said, that we are writing as a process, and what is coming out of this, it's a more or less a kind of common story. But we are taking risks, and it's allowed for an open and playful and mutual relation between writers and readers, and teachers and students. So passion, social life, and sociology only exist in the in-between, in specific and moving social relationships. And I think that our common work is about this quotation that we have bring to this presentation. So some threats then, Gaia, to ending this.
So yeah, we have some final notes that will probably help us write up, because the next phase for us is to write up this work together. There's things to do with creating space and time, space in time of distance, and the space itself, this creation as an act of resistance against division and fragmentation, and touching as an action of both personal and political and social action. We told intergenerational stories. We talked about dignity across all kinds of boundaries, and even the space online that we constructed and we still keep constructing, for us is a space of being other and together, of knowing how this threshold is possible to be permeable. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
So I believe the next one's online also.
Yes, sir.
Yep, you want to share your screen?
Yeah, can you see?
Yes.
There we go. Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next, it's the further development of my own story of loss, and I'm reading a long autobiography piece, and with a couple of slides, and this is the first time I'm reading it in public, so I hope I can read it and not get too emotional. Thank you. So you saw earlier on the poem that I wrote in memory of my brother, and more than in memory, it's about the impossibility of touching. And then I wrote this piece that I'm reading together. I'm reading now. You and I, me and you, we have always been together. We came from the same body, from our mother. She's no longer here, but this is another story. We share the same land, our mountains, the same house. We walk across the same territories, you and I, me and you. My hands now feel like branches, broken, falling apart from the tree, cut fragments of what we were, you and I, me and you. My hands could not touch you, could not protect you, caress you, take care of you. My hands feel useless, empty, fragile. You and I, me and you, have been separated. My hands were trying to reach you. No, you are not allowed here. It's dangerous, contagious. You are not allowed here. You cannot stay here. My hands trembled, could not stay still, busy doing million things, trivial things in search for you. You are no longer here to keep them calm, to restore peace, unit, harmony. Broken pieces, fragments of what you and I were, have been, me and you and me. 23rd October 2020, I was writing on my computer, had a group project meeting for my doctorate. I had you on my mind. I was trying to concentrate. You stepped in violently, broke my capacity to think, write, work. A call from the hospital. Your condition was getting worse, they said. You had just a couple of hours to live, they said. A cold phone call in the middle of a gray autumn morning. I had been walking before that morning, trying to find peace, to connect with the land, our land. I had visited that place special to you with the hope it would bring peace and would save you. Few hours later, that call from the hospital. His conditions are getting worse. We don't think he will survive longer. They said, I replied, I will come to the hospital. They said, no, you cannot come. You cannot enter here. Nobody can enter the intensive care. You cannot come, it's useless. Try to remember him in his happy days. I said, I decide how I want to remember him. He's still alive, I'm coming. They said, no, you cannot enter here. Nobody will let you in. I said, I will come anyway. I want to be close as possible to him. I decide where I want to be. A cold voice on the other side, trying to be compassionate. Well, you will not be able to come and to enter anyway. I went. I left my computer open, the meeting still going on, camera off. I took few things with me, jumped into the car and drove to you, to be close to you, to touch you, at least with my being there, if not with my hands. I could not resume that writing any longer. The computer has been waiting for me, for my hands to work again, to function. May 2022, this year, I'm touching my computer again. I'm writing about you. You are no longer here, but my hands are working again. Karen Baraz says, when two hands touch, there is a sensuality of the flesh, an exchange of warmth, a feeling of pressure, of presence, a proximity of otherness that brings the other nearly as close as oneself, perhaps closer. And if the two hands belong to one person, might this not enliven an uncanny sense of the otherness of the self, a literally holding oneself at a distance, in the sensation of contact, the greeting of the stranger within? So much happens in a touch, and an infinity of others, other beings, other spaces, other times are aroused. I was standing there on that cold long corridor outside the intensive care. 23rd October 2020, 3 p.m. They let me in the hospital. Conflict, discussion, argument, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, you cannot go in. Yes, I can. No, you cannot. I need to. No, you cannot go in. I need to. Yes, I can. My brother is dying. I need to be there. Disinfecting, cleaning, measuring temperature, gloves, mask, the materiality of objects around me. I cannot feel them. I don't care. I am here. I'm here in this long corridor outside the intensive care. I managed to go in. A nurse passes by saying, you cannot stay here. I reply, yes, I can. I phone, I spoke to you earlier on. I am in, I'm not leaving. She replies, yes, but you cannot go inside. It's pointless staying here. I reply, I decide what it is pointless or not. I am staying here. She smiles at me, doesn't know what to say. It's called I'm tired, 5:30 p.m. A couple of friends are actually joining me. They have the same conversation, maybe easier because I made the way in. The nurse gave up. She looked at us with mix of anger, compassion, disbelief, not knowing what to say in her professional outfit. She belongs, we don't. 23rd October 2010, 5:45 p.m. She, the nurses, comes out again. She, the nurse, in her professional white outfit, asks me if I want to see him. She has spoken to the consultant. I say, can I come in? She looks at me, smiling with compassionate look, saying, no, nobody can in intensive care. You can see him on the phone. I can show him with a video call. Disbelief, surprise, ethical dimension, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, no, yes, yes. I said yes, I wanted to see him, even on the phone. 23rd October 2020, 6 p.m. A call, she's calling from inside the intensive care, asking me if I'm ready. Suddenly, she is kind, gentle. Maybe she cares. Maybe she has always been caring, kind and gentle, and caring for him too. She could touch him. Her hands could soothe him, caress him, clean him, look after him. I could not. My hands were not allowed him. And I said, yes, I'm ready. He is there on a bed, surrounded by machines, tubes, lights, red and green, numbers, sounds. He's still breathing. I can see the breathing is very fragile. He's still alive. I cry. I send him a kiss. I touch the phone. I touch him. My hands, his face, is breathing. I'm let in for a moment. The machine is an extension of me, of him. The machines are him. I hear his breathing. 23rd October 2020, 6:30 p.m. The machines are off. Your breathing stopped. I am outside here in the cold corridor, not alone anymore. I am in somehow. I have been let in. Somewhere I've been let in. I found a crack, an opening, a smooth place to be with you, to belong. I'm touching that door, the porosity of the door, and an infinite number of small particles are reaching you through the door. I'm roaming for you. I'm holding you at a distance. I'm here, you and I, me and you, we-ness, witness, running through our land, climbing our mountains, you and I, me and you. We touch each other through that door. Our hands finally can feel the warmth of our being together, yet apart. Matter counts, matter has a vitality. Matter, Jane Bennett says, has agency. I managed to cut through materiality. I perform an agential cut, a breakthrough. I, as Braidotti would argue, have been not one, but together the same. I've been on that threshold, in the liminal space between here and there, you and me and you. The materiality of that place, the coldness, the clinical, sterile presence of impersonal objects, chairs, light, machine, numbers, white gowns, green furniture, has allowed me to breathe for you, with you, for one last moment of togetherness apart. In that assemblage of human, non-human, machine, blood, flesh, breath, chair, bench, door, glass, light, phone, voice, I existed, you existed, you and me, I and you. She, the nurse, after a while comes out. She, the nurse, with her white gown, her sterile look. She, the nurse, gave me your objects. She, the nurse, say she was sorry. She, the nurse, left. I stay with the objects in your hand, a small plastic bag. The nurse said I could not open for a month. She, the nurse, said it might be contagious. I stayed with the bag in my hands touching the bag, you in that bag. Millions of small particles crossing the boundaries, virus, germs, illness, death, life. A phone, a charger, a pair of reading glasses, you in that bag. I stay, I touch it. She, the nurse, left. 23rd October 2020, 9 p.m. I left. I walk out of the hospital that contained my pain, your suffering, your last breath, your body, your plastic bag. The nurse, I left, you stay. They had to cut you apart. Bringing you back together is the protocol. They need to understand the virus in your body, in your lungs. You, a body without organs. Your body, I could not touch it. They can cut you apart. I came back home. The computer still in the same place I left, open, unfinished documents, unfinished work. Everything the same, yet everything changed. You and I, me and you, we have been together. We touch each other. I could not touch the computer for months. I could not write, I could not think. My hands could not perform, I could not think. Emails, phone calls, asking for an extension. I cannot complete my work. I cannot finish my doctorate. Why, they asked, because I could not touch you. I could not be with you because my hands are broken. Bureaucracy, institution, the same coldness, different places, maybe different furniture, different lights, different machine, different colors, maybe less clinical, yet the same answers. No, you are not allowed here. No, you cannot do that. You need to ask for a permission. I did. I performed another agential cut. I wrote, I argued, I took a position, I defend my position. I learned this from you, to fight, to have a voice, to defend your rights, to fight for who has not a voice. You had no voice on the bed. I had a voice for you. I roamed for you. It did matter. I wrote to the consultant. I wrote to the head of the doctoral studies. I challenged institutional dominant voices, hierarchies. I rebelled. I learned to have a voice. I performed an onto-epistemological and methodological cut. I did things differently. Now I want to have you in my writing. They say, no, it does not fit in. Write about him somewhere else, not in your thesis. I argued, I took a position, I challenged methodologies, the dominant academic discourse. I could write again. I could write about you, with you in my research. I am my research, you are part of it. You interrupted my writing, you cut in violeting through an autumn morning while I was writing. You are part of me, you are part of my research. I argue, I use writing as a method of inquiry, as Saint-Pierre says. Writing is a process, not the final act. Writing is becoming. I, for sure, became something different on the 23rd of October, 2020. That space placed the materiality of the final moments there with you had a long-lasting effect on my thinking, on my capacity to write, on me as a scholar. I had to stop writing, working, producing. I stay with you. Now I take you with me everywhere. I said, you cannot stop me writing. You cannot stop me having a voice. The interaction between you and me, you, me, and matter, hands touching machine, writing computer are part of myself. And my writing diffracted and tangled through time and space. I carry that responsibility to speak about you, to be able to respond, always through and with you, as Karen Barad would say. In an important sense, in a breathtaking, intimate sense, touching, sensing is what matter does, or rather what matter is. Matter is condensation of responsibility. Touching is a matter of response. Each of us is constituted in responsibility. Each of us is constituted as responsible for the other, as being in touch with the other. Thank you.
If it would be easier, I do have a link to the presentation.
Started the study in order to better understand the inherited literacies passed through generations of telling the same story, and that story was the Toloa and the Humu. This particular story is important because it carries many metaphors for Pacifica, specifically Tongans. Within this presentation, I offer several excerpts of the story out of context from different situated spaces of storytelling. To not be lost in this presentation, it is important to know the basic plot line of the Toloa and the Humu. So basically, what the Toloa and the Humu is that there were twins, Maufulele and Maufutoka, who were born of a goddess and a Tongan chief. They go to Tonga to live with their father, but they're too big of a burden on the people, and so the village conspires to get rid of them. Trying to trick the twins into battle with undefeatable monsters on far islands, the villagers are surprised when the twins defeat both the Humu, the triggerfish, and the Toloa, a particularly huge duck. The boys catch the hint and leave, but place the Humu and the Toloa in the sky to guide Tongan sailors ever after. And these are those constellations. This is the Toloa. It's an upside-down duck, but it's the Southern Cross in Western cosmology. And this is the Humu, or what Western cosmology knows as the coal sack. I chose to do this study in autoethnography for many reasons. Some of the main features of the autoethnography that I used specifically was that the writing is the product and the process. The analysis is emergent with the data set. The rigor is centered in essential and continuous critical analyses. It followed every different situated space in the telling of the same tale of the Toloa and the Humu in my study. And specifically, I needed the writing to be flexible, evocative, malleable in style and genre, so it could carry ideas and characters one writing genre couldn't possibly. For example, so that I could populate my study with generational participants, like Grandma Louise or Grandma Mafilao and Tuipe, Niua and baby Tuipe who had not been born yet at the beginning of this study. In the retelling of so this is an excerpt from my study explaining a little bit about what I did. In the retelling of the Humu and the Toloa, I am distinctly aware of how old gods and new ones populate my storytelling. Tangaloa and Autoethnography sit uneasy with Christ and Joseph Smith. My ancestors, on both sides of my family tree, gather quietly, waiting for me to start. I imagine all of them in the audience listening to my retelling, leaning in to see if I include them, as they raised me to start. I start with the trepidation of one who knows she is in the act of disappointing. So these are characters separated in time that join with characters separated in place or space. Some of the situated storytelling spaces that I explored were the stage performance. For this would be an example of one, but inside my study was my son's storytelling. Curricula, contributions of international diaspora, Talanoa, a Tongan methodology, that is story sharing, reaffirming of belonging and identity. There's the evening storytelling that I explored, and that's always done by an elder storyteller in a familial setting. Whananga texts were Tongan storytellers of the early 20th century dictating to European ethnographers who wrote it down and put them in books. Writing the meta-narrative of this study, Zoom Talanoa was also a space that I explored. It condensed time and space as well with that Tava theory I mentioned earlier, sometimes unsuccessfully, but my favorite situated space was the Kaliloa. And so I have an excerpt from my study of the Kaliloa. And this is a picture that my son drew of the loa and the humu. This is the humu, the triggerfish, and that's the loa. So Kaliloa and improvisation. The villagers, this is my telling the story to my son. The villagers decided to call another meeting, so while the boys were off enjoying a sauna break in some distant volcanoes, no, they were riding megalodons. My 7-year-old reminds me. We lie in bed, his head on my shoulder, my arm around him, and this is Kaliloa, the most intimate form of storytelling between a parent to their child. Kaliloa are akonaki, advice, and the bedtime stories told to children just before sleep so as to populate the child's dreams and remind them in so many ways of the things that are most important. My son, transfixed on the earlier imagery of the twins' impossible tasks, insists that the story includes some hero of his own. And why not? This is as much his story as it has been mine. Okay, they went again to ride megalodons. In the sunset, and the village met. All our food is gone, our wells run dry, our children hunger. The twins must be stopped. They can't stay here. Then they must go, the chief says again, this time knowing that to save his people, the twins had to leave. But how? The village was quiet in thought. Then an elder from the center of the crowd pointed to the chief and called the Toloa. The name whispered throughout the crowd until the chief quieted the people with his arms raised above them. That demon is only legend, he said, glaring into the crowd. It is real, the old man insisted. Tangataiki, tell us what you know. The chief took the old man's hand and helped him to stand and speak. We always need to listen to our elders. Yes, Baba? Yes. What did the old guy say? Elder. What do you mean, what did the elder say? Yes, what did the elder say? Many generations ago, my grandfather's grandfathers once told of an island to the west, beautiful with high cliffs and abundant fruit. They once went there to hunt when a hurricane and sudden darkness came upon the island. The sky filled with thunder and the earth shook. It was not a hurricane, but the beating of mighty wings, a body so large it hid the sun and engulfed the earth in night. Not thunder, but a monstrous quack. I wait. This is an important part of the retelling. Timing. Did you say quack? Yes, a monstrous quack. It's a duck? Yep, seriously. A seriously huge duck that picks people off the earth like they were breadcrumbs. The chief, along with the new sailors, equipped their boats for the voyage that would take them past the sunset, far to the west, to the island of the Toloa. Toloa. My son tries out the word. I'm surprised at his diction. His pronunciation is spot on, where the T in Tongan nearly sounds like a D, and the accent is on the second to last vowel. I never pointed these patterns of language out to him. He picks up so much without my telling him anything. The implications of this study were, among other findings, this was apparent. Stories exist outside of the hyper-rational, one-sided colonizer lens of fact and worth, beauty, emotion, context, and especially community connection. Validate stories far past plot lines and narrative arcs. Learning spaces could be better transformed to better hold ancient stories in the simultaneous space of truth and myth, and cultivate the craft of listening as importantly as the skill of speaking or producing. Decentering Western world lens and opening up writing and reading genres to meld into each would, among other things, cultivate the craft of listening, waiting, sitting inside a story. The primary purpose of this type of learning or storytelling would not be the point of the plotline, but instead be the connection between community, those within and out of the story, the teller, the participating audience, and those to whom will later receive the same story. Thank you so much.